Galen, thank you so much for jumping on.
No problem.
So I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software. We're doing a series on interesting industries, at least interesting for us, ones that we like to operate in and discuss innovation. Galen, you want to take a couple minutes to explain who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Galen Dillowin. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for New Tech Energy Alliance. We're an oil field service company providing subsurface characterization to the industry. In the short term, I like to tell people that aren't in the industry, we help individuals and companies find and get oil and gas out of the ground better, faster, quicker, more completely.
Okay, yeah, that works. That explains it. I like how you have your two pitches ready to go, like, depending on who you talk to, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, we work for big oil and gas companies, call it your Exxons, your Shells, your Chevrons,
Hmm.
people like that, that we all know as home brands. We work for the smaller companies. I like to say we work all the way down to the Mike of Mike Oil, right? You
Hmm.
know, the people that's trying to do it, whether it's some of our clients are financial individuals, some of our clients are family offices, some of our clients are large international oil companies. And so we have some unique solutions in the space, and we've been around now for 27 years. So
Oh,
not a
wow.
young company, but kind of an established company, but still independent.
So you've been, I think, at the company for 16 years. How did
Correct.
your role evolve over time?
So I came in. I started off my career right out of college. I've been blessed only being at two companies. I was at with Schlumberger for the first almost 10 years of my career, and since then I've been with New Tech. Uh, so when I came on board, I came on as an account representative doing sales,
Hmm.
more technical side of things. And over time, I became a called a traveling salesman. Not in the sense of you know vacuums and things like that, but going to different markets and handling a lot of the outer markets, and then became a sales manager, and then over time just continued to do that. Worked on a lot of technical development and commercial feasibility within our company, and now kind of do a little bit of all of it. It's jack of all, master of none for sure.
What takes up most of your time as a VP BD?
It's probably it's split evenly between technical liaising with our clients and making sure they understand it, and then development of new products.
How does that work? Like the handoff, from a BD slash sales perspective, all the way to, I guess, the product team, or is there an account executive that takes on at that time, or how does it work?
Sometimes if I'm lucky, there
Sometimes.
is. So quite often I'm talking with very high level executives, whether it's the C level suite,
Yeah.
or asset owners in unique situations where they're having difficulty either understanding something or bringing multiple groups together to help solve some sort of problem, whether it's the fact that in oil and gas the zone's depleted, or do we move on to a tertiary recovery, which means doing things like water floods to push more oil or gas out of the reservoir? Do we move to new formations? Where could we try different situations? Can we take this technique determined in, let's say, the Permian Basin in West Texas to Turkey or something like that? Can we
Hmm.
apply it over there, or Australia? How do we go in there and complete all of that work? Does it apply the same? So I get involved in a lot of those conversations, and then I come back, and we have a really small dedicated technical team here. And so I take what the client really wants and figure out how to apply our pieces to it to get that solution, and come up with unique workflows for each one. And then they do the work. Then I get to present the results and seem really smart.
Like I say, often, if there's complaints, tell our account executive, and praise, you could go to me.
That's
Um, yeah.
the best way to do it. I need to hire those then.
Where do you see, obviously in your industry in oil and gas, where do you see the most waste?
most of the waste I find is people redoing work that other people have already done. You know,
Okay.
just for the fact that they don't want to pay a little bit of money to access that kind of information, whether the interpretation has been done, whether the understanding's been done, or you don't want to hire in a consultant because you want to truly understand it all. I think any good consultant should be able to explain everything they've done to a point where the client can understand it all as if
Hmm.
it was their own work. And that's the approach we've taken here for the 28, 27 years we've been around is we want someone to understand it. When I use terms like petrophysics, people get a little scared, right? They're like, oh, I don't do that. Well, let's explain it in such a way that if you're a landman trying to buy land out in North Dakota because you think it's prospective, that you understand everything went in. That doesn't mean you're going to do it, but you want to understand when somebody else is trying to sell you something, what's right, wrong, indifferent, get to the point where you can, what I call, pass the smell test, right?
Hmm. So knowledge transfer is a bit of a blocker.
A bit. Obviously, we've had, the media has dubbed this time in our industry as the great crew change, where we have a lot of older individuals retiring out and that knowledge transfer is not happening. A lot of the younger individuals that have come in since the shale revolution in oil and gas uh, don't know how to do exploration anymore. They think they do because they took a class in school, but we all know anyone that's been through college and been out in industry for a while, you know that that's not really application.
Yeah.
That's a base to start from.
Theory and practice are different things for sure.
Absolutely. And so that we've seen some of that. Of course, there's whenever you're looking at going back into areas, we like to say, all the old ideas become new. And we're going to make the same mistakes because we just don't know better. It's a logical fallacy that we fall through. But there's a lot of availability out there. The other thing I think we're running into is the fact that applying things like AI within our space is very difficult because the data is not really in a digestible format. So you can't just say, you know, hey, Google, tell me where to drill the next well. We want to get that place, but a lot of that data is not in a format that Google can even take in and say, all right, this is a comparison of one thing to another that I can use, whether it's data nomenclature, whether it's tabular data. A lot of our stuff is still in paper format, honestly, not even digital. I mean, at least if it was in a PDF, you could use some sort of OCR or something like that to help get yourself there and start that process. But it's just not necessarily there. And so we still do a lot of digitizing, of things, trying to get it to a format that we can pass on to somebody else.
Yeah, I think models are getting better and better at just ingesting data, like no matter the form, right? It's possible that this problem get fixed, in the next couple of updates, really. Um, I'm pretty amazed, honestly, at what we can do now. Like we use AI a lot, and most of our assessment and technical assessments are like it's just usually AI driven first because we have a bit of a proprietary blend of models in house that we use, and I think it's more about you basically need specialized models. Like you can't really use off the shelf, GPT or Gemini or whichever. Like it's not going to get you anywhere. But if you have models trained on basically your expertise and your data sets, then it can get to a place where that gets interesting results.
I agree. And you're going to find a lot of, as these models progress, like you were talking about, a lot of the regressions back to different links to data. I think it'll provide insight. I think we can get there, and I think it'll be a very powerful tool when it does get there. The meantime, though, is our industry is very distrustful. Uh,
Yeah, I've noticed.
as just a natural state of being, mostly because it's a competition between each other. We don't work together very well. We work against each other very well because a lot of them play a zero sum game, and
Hmm.
so they don't want to share it. So the thought of me using, let's say, ChatGPT is I don't want that data out there to be used is in the mass. So I have to go into some sort of a proprietary system then.
Yeah.
But I'm not really I look at it kind of like computers. I grew up, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. and coming through that. I was pretty good early on with programming, or at least I like to think I was as a kid, doing a lot of my own things, trying to write computer games, stuff like that. But then there was a certain point, the development of the World Wide Web and stuff like that, where I really stopped doing things like that, and quickly I was outpaced, right? And so when I go into your large language models and things like that, and start trying to ask Chat GPT stuff, honestly, I think I do it a disservice because I use it like a fancy Google, right? Hey, I'm looking for something to eat with my wife on this day, and she doesn't like Indian food. And, I put it out there, and they come up with a list of 80 restaurants. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me much. And so I like the conversational nature of it, but
Yeah, it's gonna be, listen, like it's gonna be as good as your prompt,
right,
right? Where you almost have to, especially now, like especially OpenAI, like the new models, they're missing a bit of the critical aspect where they just like praise everything you do, right? And everything's a great idea, and so you have to almost force it into making decisions on your behalf, or like saying, like, this is what traditionally we would like, in your context of the food, and this is how she thinks, and I want you to make a decision essentially. And then it'll be like, okay, well, you should do this, right?
yeah. A part of me wonders if, I shouldn't bring someone on that's almost a high schooler, just right out of high school, that has no knowledge of our industry, to kind of remove the biasing that we have as naturally going into it. Because I think we are our worst enemy when it comes to that. We've developed so many tools internally to handle this stuff. And we have clients ask us about making those tools available commercially. I'm like, well, you know how when you write a program for yourself, it's never at a commercial point. There's always some sort of hiccup that you just know that, it's kind of the idea of, you slap the TV on the side and all of a sudden it goes to that channel, right? It's not, that's kind of what writing code is for yourself. But if we could bring someone in that could see things in a different light, right? I
Yep,
hate,
yep.
I hate the thought when people say we've always done it that way. For me, that's a reason just to go out and do something different.
Yeah, and you hear that a lot. Is in oil and gas is what I'm hearing. Like we only have one client in the industry, and it's a fairly large client for us at this point, and we enjoy working with them very much. And um, that's why we were kind of prompted to start this series. And um, everyone I talk to at one point in the interview will say, this just because it's the way it's always done. It's very much a recurring theme.
Well, the other thing we're finding is that in the industry as a whole, there's been, we've gone to fewer and fewer people. Nobody has time to. I'm not going to say not innovate. I mean, that's the wrong term. They don't have. There's got to be an immediate return on everything that
Yeah,
everyone does, and if there's not, they don't. People don't have the time to dream or to
there's
just.
no appetite for it. Yeah,
And so when you start looking at things like that, you can't. It's hard to get there, and you find the people that are able to do that are people that were let go by, let's say, Marathon. They got bought out by Conoco, and now you have a lot of really smart people that all of a sudden have time on their hands that can finally look into this, that, and the other. Will start innovating some neat things. The other thing is we find that a lot of the technology just wasn't adapted over the years. There's a client, not a client, a company that came to us wanting to do 3D visualizations. We thought that was fantastic. And we were partnered up. We started taking it to the industry, and they're like, don't really care. We, we, we can do 2D visualizations and get everything we need out of it. We're like,
yeah,
but this is really cool. And they're like, yeah, not going to do it, not going to pay for it.
yeah. That's the thing. Like that's the reality of product market fit, right? Even though you think you have a great idea, and maybe like some people have like this problem, doesn't mean that the rest of the market does, or that they're interested in that. And so us as a service provider and as a software company, like we see startups all the time coming to us with supposedly the next billion-dollar idea, and then all of a sudden like they hit a wall because they hadn't really checked if that was an actual problem.
No, and market feasibility. That's the one thing that any tech person, well, not any, but most tech people run into the thing that they forget about. They think if they build it, they will come, right? It's the whole field of
Yeah,
dreams
yeah.
thing, and that's not necessarily the case. Just because you
No,
build something that's cool and
almost
all
never is really.
doesn't mean, how many years was the SUV around before it became popular, right? You got Suburbans back to what, the 50s, you know?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Well, so before the SUV, like what was popular? Minivans, I guess, at one point, and then before that, it
Yeah,
was
station wagons.
yeah, wagons. I was gonna say, why did the SUVs get more popular?
Oh, it's kind of cool, right? If you can go up in the mountains and have four-wheel drive, and
Yeah, I mean, I live in Montreal, Canada, so like, if you don't have that, like, the potholes here are crazy deep, and the weather is pretty bad in the winter, so it's almost a given. And plus, yeah, as soon as you start having a bunch of kids and a dog and everything, like you need to fit them somewhere.
yeah, I grew up north of Toronto, so I had the exact same situation growing up. I remember the first one our family got was a Ford Bronco 2, right? And that was back in the day, and we thought that was really innovative. We thought we could go anywhere with that thing. Uh, but yeah, it's now I'm down here in Houston, and I mean it's obviously the truck capital of the world. So it's
For other reasons, although you more and more you get kind of weather swings in Texas, right?
true. We have to deal with obviously heavy rain, and
Heavy rain and snow sometimes, or is it more in northern Texas, or
more northern Texas, and more often it's ice than it is snow,
which
right?
is worse? I mean, technically, yeah.
But
Yeah.
we like to say you can get all four seasons in Texas in a day. If you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes.
Just wait a few minutes, move a couple meters.
That's right.
Um, what innovation are you most excited about in your field?
We're working on quite a few new things with different collaborators that are specialized in their areas. I think that there's going to be a combination of service companies, kind of the consolidation like we're seeing within the operator space,
Hmm.
within the service providers, just because nobody wants to go to the transmission shop. Nobody wants to go to the mechanic. Nobody wants to go on down to the body shop. They want to take it to one place and have it all done. So we're trying to make strategic partnerships in that space to kind of combine offerings uh, and provide that. And I think there's going to be a consolidation down there, which will then give the people that have started on those things the chance to innovate in and of themselves. How do we come up with something better, right? Whether it's digital or ease of access to different data sets or quality sets or just knowledge and sharing that out there.
Are you frustrated by, let's say, an outdated process that's still prevalent in your industry?
Oh, probably every day. Uh, Communication is still, I mean, the fact that our industry's number one software is Excel, is
Yeah, that says a lot. Yeah.
is in and of itself frustrating. So many things are done, kind of back of the napkin type situations. Now,
Hmm.
we can get very technical on all of these things. We're an industry full of engineers that loves to get way past the decimal place, and so some of the frustration I've shared is when people, think that you're butting in on their space or their ownership of something, and they want to argue something. They forget the fact that at the end of the day, we're talking about dollars. And that's everything. I mean, we're in this industry to make money. We're not in here to provide oil and gas to the world. We just happen to do it through the space. And I try to remind people, I said, if we could make more money on this acreage shearing sheep, then bring out the clippers, right? We need to go in and keep an eye on what it is we're always trying to work on. We just happen to do it through the production of hydrocarbon out there.
Hmm.
Likewise, we've gone into other industries like geothermal, like carbon capture to help
Hmm.
different companies with things like that, lithium extraction. We work a lot of the different industries because you need the technical expertise. So
So your skills, you're saying your skills in oil and gas, for instance, or and a specific service in oil and gas also apply in others.
absolutely, absolutely. And so it's having the innovation to not get pigeonholed down
Yeah.
one path. which is one of the unique things that New Tech has enabled me to do is have that vision and go out and talk to different companies over the years and talk to some of the newer technologies. People that are innovating these technologies for their feasibility. Like you said, somebody's got a great technology. I worked, I want to say it was 5 years ago with a company out of Canada, out of Calgary, that came up with a tool for mapping natural fractures out of the wellbore. And I thought it was a great technology. We talked quite a bit. We were showing them how we were determining natural fractures because obviously that helps us with draining reservoirs. If you got cracks down there, it makes it a little bit easier. And so I try to make connections wherever I go, try to introduce people to other people. I think that will help them and introduce them to a group that got them into a DOE project. But then the gentleman just drug his feet trying to develop a tool for that application and never got it off the ground. And to my knowledge, the technology went away with him.
Missed the timing.
That's more right than ever. It's very rarely in this industry do we have the technical component is very complete and understood. The problem is timing or the structure of a deal to make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's more often than not.
It's funny you said Excel because one of the first projects we worked on in the industry was turning kind of an Excel process into a SaaS, right? That was the first thing we did and still do, I think. Like we just move on from project to project where, okay, well, we're keeping inventory with an Excel. Can we have it on and then it's almost always to kind of fix an internal hurdle and then they kind of realize, oh, everybody else needs this, and so like it's turning into at that point a B2B SaaS, and then they start selling software.
And we did that with our SaaS-based platform too. I was looking for some information one day, and I was at that point really big into listening to a lot of personal and business development podcasts, many, many years ago, pre-COVID. And one of the books I was listening to at the time said, if you go looking for a product and it doesn't exist, you kind of have the ownership to go build that because somebody else is looking for it also.
Probably.
And so that's our SaaS-based platform for geology and petrophysics came about from that. Is I came back to the leadership and said, listen, that Netflix thing looks like it's doing pretty good, and Amazon's starting to kick off and do okay, and we have a whole bunch of data. What if we made it available out there so someone could click and get an answer? 2.5 years later, we created our platform, and we continue to add to it and add subscribers to it. We do it on a subscription basis, and the big part behind it, though, is most of the people that are on it are not super technical all the time, or they're very specific in their niche, and they need the other pieces of information, but they understand our process because we've communicated it to them. They can explain it to either their management or anyone else that asks them questions onto it, and we sit behind and support it. So when they have questions, we jump on and we answer those questions for them. So they don't have to be the expert, but they have access to the expert.
Right. Is that your core business at this point? This software?
It's probably 30%.
Okay, significant.
So we still have an awful lot of consultancy that we do, and the consultancy feeds the SaaS-based platform also.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I see. So it's a core component of it, and then you kind of build consulting services around it. Yeah.
And then we get pull through with it also, people that need a different question answered.
Yeah.
Sure. If you've already got the walls built, to build a house makes it very easy.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah, for the comparable for us would be like we were ERP resellers at times, and so a lot of the times the ERP like the sell is either the core engine, which in our case is Odoo, or they want customization, or vice versa, right? So that's a good model to have. Right? That's smart. If you could fix one inefficiency in oil and gas, like magic wand type intervention, and all of a sudden it's solved, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the biggest problems facing oil and gas is regulatory compliance. I
Okay.
think it's a unique space out there. It's not one that I deal with on a regular basis, but within the industry, because it is so variable from state to state and it's so paperwork intensive, and you generally have people that have no knowledge of the industry involved in that. You have
Hmm.
more government officials. You know,
Yeah.
look at our current administration down here. The fact that Chris Wright was appointed finally the energy secretary was a huge step and a win for the industry, we thought, because now you have someone that actually knows something about it.
Yeah, that's funny how that works, huh?
Right. And so when he talks to Congress, right, you hear him and we kind of cheer from the background. Yeah, I was trying to think of something. Whenever you listen to a good example, there was years ago, one of the senators from Texas was out there talking to Congress about oil and gas exploration and talking about, the fact that 40% of the wells at that time or 60% of the wells at that time were not ever going to produce any hydrocarbon. And he went through a 2 hour spiel explaining this to Congress. And one of the congressmen stood up and said, "Well, why don't they stop drilling all these dry holes?" Put his hand down, took his glasses off, and said, "Well, obviously, since you didn't pay any attention to what I've said in the last uh, 2 hours, we'll start again." But he was just talking about, why should they give tax breaks for different things? Uh,
Hmm.
because there's some inherent risk in doing this kind of work. But on the regulatory side, they could make it easier to access some of those lands, especially in places like Colorado or New Mexico or even Alaska. And the current administration obviously is very favorable towards our business. And so they've opened up a lot of that. Um, we say here that uh, Republicans are good for oil and gas operations, Democrats are good for oil and gas price. So
Okay, yeah. That works. I get that. Well, deregulation on the Republican side, I guess, and then just the economy typically does better with under Democrats. Although this is my Canadian view of the U.S.
Well, there's an awful lot of the same things right now. Now that Trudeau's gone up in Canada, we've seen a little bit of relaxing in Alberta. That there's been more people looking
Yeah,
to invest up there.
that's
There
right.
in the Montney and Duvernay, you have some of the best world class resources available. If BC can get out of the way and put a pipeline to the coast, so you have an export terminal on the west coast, you could knock out a lot of competition worldwide for getting heavy crude out of the country. Um, Again, and if you in Quebec, you've got the Utica that comes up underneath there as a potential reservoir. I know there was some companies looking to develop that years ago, and they outlawed fracking, mostly because of, you know, they had some justification. It's not completely unjustified, but the state of New York has the same thing, right? Just south of them. They don't want that kind of situation there. But people forget all the good things that oil and gas have done for the industry, for the world, right? The ability for plastics and just about, if you just look in your own background or my own background here, this desk has got hydrocarbon in it. People say,
Oh,
"Well, I
of
drive a
course.
Tesla," right? Well, Tesla takes more oil to build than a regular car does, especially if you constitute all of the heavy machinery to mine lithium out.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, I think there's a place for it. I'm an all of the above energy supplier. I think there's a place for solar, there's a place for wind, there's a place for geothermal, there's a place for hydro. But again, you're not going to have hydro in Qatar, right? You're not going to
Probably
have
not without some intervention. Yeah,
right. You're not going to have geothermal in Florida. It's
yeah,
just you don't have these things, but there is a solution everywhere. And likewise,
yeah. I had another guest that said like the best energy source is whichever is works for your particular situation.
absolutely. I mean, you can't get on top of India for using coal when they have so much of their population below poverty, right? Uh,
Yeah,
should we do better? Should we get a way to make more profitable energy? Absolutely. I think that we need to be looking at that as a globe, because if you look at how much of your average yearly income goes towards energy, and I'm not talking about electricity because that's such a small part of it. But if you look at, let's say, your
especially
food,
here in Quebec. Yeah.
sure. But if you look at just the amount you're paying for food, how much of that's on transport cost, right?
Hmm.
A lot of it, probably 40% is based off of that. Very little of it's actually getting all the way back to the farmer who's growing something or rancher that's raising something or uh, and so I think there's gonna be an energy revolution that comes in the next 20 years, and I think we don't even know as the average everyday Joe what that is yet. But I'm the fact that the human mind is so innovative on it, I think it'll be interesting to see. But again, hydrocarbons not going anywhere. The death of oil isn't out there because we need it for all the other byproducts and things like that.
And we keep talking about that on the show so far. I mean, it seems like the enthusiasm to get out of oil has kind of died down essentially, or from a couple of years ago where it was green everything, and EVs need to replace all the cars in 5 years, and obviously all those timelines are out the window now. It seems.
Well, so much of it was being pushed. In oil and gas, we get a bad rep because it's very easy when you have something like the Exxon Valdez, right? I grew up in the 80s, like I said. So you got that, and someone holds up a duck that's covered in oil, and that's terrible, right?
Yeah, of
Nobody
course.
wants
Yeah.
that. Most of the people in oil and gas are outdoor enthusiasts. We do like to hunt, we do like to spend time out there fishing, camping. Heck, all of our work is done outdoors. We're not working generally in big cities unless you're working high up in these companies. Most of the time you're in, Wyoming, in the middle of nowhere, out from a city. Uh, I remember when I worked at Schlumberger and we had recruits that would come in to come see what oil and gas was about for potentially trying to want to hire on. And I gave them a spiel. I said, listen, if you want to live in a big city, oil and gas probably isn't for you. You're not going to live in, at that time, the Barnett wasn't happening in Dallas. I said, you're not going to live in Dallas. You're not going to live in New York. You're not going to live in LA generally. So there's obviously always an exception to that. And if you're in the finance world, yes, you can still be involved in oil and gas. But as a percentage, most of these people are in Midland. These
Yeah.
people are, you're not in Calgary. You're in uh, Brooks. You're in, one of these smaller cities out there. You're not,
Yeah.
you're not in these huge hubs. Maybe you can get to Pittsburgh if you're lucky, right? But you're not in Philadelphia or in Washington. So it's a different component, it's a different mindset. But we love the outdoors. We want to take care of it. That's where we spend our time, even if we have the choice. And so it's interesting seeing that coming back. That we try to make sure that we do the best for the environment. Of course, there's always going to be some bad apples out there, right? That's every industry, every
Well, that's true in everywhere. Yeah.
yeah.
Final question for you, Galen. What do you think is the real blocker to innovation in oil and gas? Is it tech resources or culture?
It's definitely culture. I think we
Hmm.
have some of the smartest individuals uh, of any industry out there. We definitely have the drive to make things better, make it more opportune. But the fact is, it's a little bit of the cowboy mindset, we like to call it. It's I can do it myself. I can do it better than anybody else. But at the end of the day, there's not the time to do it. That's the one thing. All the great equalizer, if you will, is we all have the same number of hours in a day. We can't do more. It's also leveraging other industries, saying, "Hey, uh, tech can't help us with this," or big data, we don't need that information, it's not going to apply, and being very secretive about it. I think that's the other side. What's mine is mine, and if you try to take it, it's no longer mine, instead of working together to mutually benefit
Mm.
ourselves.
So a bit of a cutthroat um, environment.
For sure, there absolutely is that. I mean, it's you know yeah. We also run from the fallacy. If I want to say there was a second one, we run from a fallacy that we're smarter now than we ever were. And the problem is, quite often we're working with data from decades ago, if not
Uh-huh.
half a century ago, and we'll say, oh, they didn't know what they were doing. Well, no, they exactly knew what they were doing. They probably knew better what they were doing than what we were doing. They were there drilling the well. They were there collecting the raw data. They were sitting there making the decisions. And we're going back looking at a piece of paper going, they don't know what they're talking about. Well, if Exxon missed something, there's probably a reason they didn't do it.
Hmm.
They didn't see the things they need to do. Now, some technologies have changed obviously over time, and we've become very efficient in things. And so, zones before that we shut off because it was making too much water, now we don't consider that too much water. So that's a technology shift. But I think for the most part, we can be very arrogant.
And you're only as smart as your data. So if the data's outdated,
Well, I have a saying because I deal with a lot of geologists. I have a hashtag for anything I post on LinkedIn. It says rock matters. You can't outperform the rock. The rock is always the one that tells you. And if for some reason your wells don't perform the way you think they should, it's because your understanding of the rock is wrong. It's not the rock itself that's wrong.
no, the rock is just a rock. It can't really be wrong.
That's right. That's exactly it, right? And so we learn from it all, but it's a continual evolution. And I think everyone needs to continue to learn and work together and come together. And I think we'll make a very efficient, very favorable industry. And I think the viewpoint of what oil and gas is going to change over the decades to come.
Yeah, I think so too. Galen, thank you so much for coming on. This is great.
But I appreciate your time.